All right, well, let's get started on this topic today, because again, this is a super important topic. We're talking today about gaslighting, and in particular, the very specific type of gaslighting that happens in a toxic or an abusive relationship where your partner or your ex, this could be your ex too, tries to convince you that you are the one who is abusive, that you are the one that was causing all the problems in the relationship. And that the relationship could just be better if you changed everything about yourself. I am curious to know if you guys have experienced this. Have you experienced this personally, whether this is in your current relationship or this is something that happened to you in the past? As I go along here and talk about what's going on here and how to help you break free of this gaslighting, I'm going to share a little bit about my story too and what this was like for me. So first, let's talk about what gaslighting is. So we're all clear on our definitions here. So gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation that makes you question your very sanity. It makes you question your reality and what is true and what is not. And this type of gaslighting, where your partner is trying to convince you that you are the person who is abusive, this happens so often in toxic and abusive relationships. I can't even tell you the number of women that I've worked with who have come out of these relationships and thought that they were the problem. They thought that they were the one who was abusive because their partners were convincing them of that. So yeah, Suzanne is saying, yeah, my ex-husband did this constantly. Yeah. So you guys know how tricky this is. So let's also talk now about the definition of abuse. What is abuse? Abuse is any action that intentionally harms or injures another person. Intentional is the word here we want to pay close attention to. So to go into a little bit more detail here, an abusive person is someone who is primarily concerned with power and control. They will use threats, they will use manipulation, they will use intimidation, they will put you down, they will isolate you, they will control what you do, they will blame you or not take your concerns seriously in the relationship. They can use children against you. There can be situations where there's economic abuse, where they are preventing you from getting a job or earning money for yourself. They can treat you like a servant. In essence, when there's abuse, it's all about power and control. We're going to be talking a lot about this today. So again, pay close attention to those words, power and control. So when it comes to this type of gaslighting and your partner or your ex convincing you that you were the abusive one, if you are not primarily concerned with gaining power and control in the relationship, then by definition, you are not abusive. We're going to go into very specific detail here about something that's called reactive abuse. So let me give you an example of a situation, and I'm actually going to go into some of the Gabby Petito things that are just all over the news, because there's a lot that has to do with gaslighting here too. But something that happened in my relationship a lot that was abusive, and this is with someone who was narcissistic, is I would have an emotional reaction to abuse, to something that happened. Usually it was an emotional manipulation, putting me down or just dismissing things that I had to say, and I would get very emotional. And in my emotional distress, I would say things that really weren't the greatest, but I was so upset because of what was happening to me that I would sometimes lash out. And my partner would say, look, you are so crazy, unstable. You are the one that is abusive. Look at how much your words are hurting me. And this is a very common dynamic for people that are in these types of relationships with someone who, when they're abusive, they are not able to take accountability for their actions because they are not primarily concerned with having a healthy relationship. Like I talked about, they are primarily concerned with gaining power and gaining control. So let's now talk about reactive abuse. Oh, Cassie, hi. I'm so glad that this is validating. Awesome. So yeah, reactive abuse is when a victim of abuse lashes out towards their abuser. They might yell, they might cry, they might even use insults or attempt to physically defend themselves. When we're talking about reactive abuse, this is not to say that any of these things are okay to do or any of these things are good to do, but it helps us to understand the dynamics of what's going on and what is actual true abuse and what is just a response to experiencing abuse as an abuse victim. So reactive abuse happens when there is extreme physical and psychological distress that occurs for a victim in this type of relationship. I am also curious to hear if you guys have experienced this as well, if you exhibited some forms of reactive abuse because of the level of psychological stress that you experienced. So, like I talked about in my story of what I experienced, the abuser will turn things around in these situations and say, look, you are the abuser. They will tell the victim that they are the abusive one. They'll say, look at you, you're out of control. While the abuser is calm, they're cool, they're collected, like nothing ever happened. This is such a common dynamic. And you can see this happening in the Gabby Petito case. If any of you guys have watched that body cam footage, it's tough to watch, but if you've watched it, you can see that Brian Laundrie is calm, he's cool, he's collected, he's laughing, he's talking to the police like, oh yeah, this is just fun, this is just a normal thing we're doing. While Gabby is extremely distraught. She's visibly upset. The officers actually thought that she was the abusive one because she admitted to hitting her partner. And they were actually almost going to charge her with domestic violence. But she was not the abuser here. She was most likely exhibiting what we just talked about, that reactive abuse. And you can clearly see the difference between her and Brian. Brian is cool, he's calm, like this is no big deal, and she is extremely distraught. That is what this dynamic looks like. And now let me know if you guys have seen this too. Yeah, Marlene is saying he turns around and says, I am the gaslighter. Yeah. Carol says, yeah, it's tough and it's such a shame. Yeah. So it sounds like you guys have experienced this too. And when we're talking about this reactive abuse here, people who are abusive, they actually rely on reactive abuse because it gives them this proof that you, the victim, are crazy, unstable, mentally ill, delusional, whatever labels they want to give you, while they come across looking sane and healthy, while you're extremely distraught. It gives them something to hold against you. And let me know if you've experienced this too. I know I certainly did. My responses to abuse when I was in an abusive relationship were held against me, very much so. They were thrown back in my face at times when my partner was looking for something to start a conflict over, or to when I brought up something about his behavior that I wanted to change, he would bring something up and say, look what you did. You did that there. You are the abusive one. I'm fine. I don't need to change. So Maya is saying, what is this video you mentioned? So Maya, yeah, here in the US, there's a case that's in the news a lot lately about a woman that was killed, and it looks like there could have been some issues with domestic violence going on. And so if you just put into YouTube, Gabby Petito, you can find that video. It's a really, really sad situation, tough to watch. But really my point here is if you are responding to abuse in an abusive way, that does not make you an abuser. It means you're in extreme distress and responding in a reactive way. Doesn't mean that it's okay, doesn't mean that it's good, but it's something that happens very often in abusive relationships, and it does not make you someone who is abusive. So first of all, is this making sense so far? Let me know as I go along here if you guys have questions or comments that you want me to address here. So yeah, Cassie's saying, my ex would say, Whatever he had done was so minuscule compared to how I had reacted, and it canceled out whatever he did that had upset me. That, yeah, Cassie, thank you for sharing that. That is a classic example of gaslighting. What you did was so much worse. You are the one that is abusive here. And what gaslighting is it's twisting reality so that you come out of that situation thinking, yeah, you know what? Maybe I really am the abusive one, when that's not what's going on here. So another thing to keep in mind is if you are here in this group, if you're watching this video, it is extremely unlikely that you are abusive. People who are abusive are not concerned with healing and having healthy relationships. They really aren't. They don't care about it. They don't care one bit, because what primarily motivates them is the desire for power and the desire for control. They're not looking for an equal, healthy, reciprocal relationship. They're looking for a relationship where they can control and they can dominate. They don't care how much they hurt other people. They want that power and control, and your feelings are irrelevant. Now, you might have come across someone who is abusive who can talk a good game about wanting to have a healthy relationship or wanting to do all the things, but when it actually comes down to it, they don't do it. My ex was an example of this. He talked a lot about wanting to have a really great relationship and having good communication, but when it came to actually doing those things, he said, "No, I don't need that." Like, I would bring things to him like, "Oh, maybe we could read this book or take this course or watch this video." "No, I already know how to do that. I don't need that." So that might happen to you too. Pay attention to someone's actions. So let me see what you guys are putting in here. So Susanna is saying, "I was told by him that I had anger issues and he would make me apologize for how he treated me if I questioned his abusive behaviors." Yeah, Suzanne, so sorry you went through that. That is an example of this particular type of gaslighting. Like, you are the one that's causing the problems, and if you just fix your anger issues, everything would be okay, right? Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yep, Maya says exactly. You're made to believe you're the crazy one. Yep, Carol says, yeah, he does not like it when he realizes he's losing control. Then he becomes super sweet. I will not fall into that trap. Good, yeah. That happens a lot too. It's part of that abuse cycle where you're experiencing a lot of the abusive behavior, and then there's that recovery period where it seems like things are getting back to a good place, and then it happens again. So yeah, thank you guys for sharing this. So again, if you care about healing and if you care about healthy relationships, then you are not abusive by definition, because your primary motivators are not power and control. And for people who are empathetic or who identify as being empaths, it can be very difficult to take in and to really understand that there are people out there who their primary motivators are power. The thing that drives them is having control, because that is so foreign from our experience of the world and our experience of relationships. But the reality is there are a lot of people out there who that is their main drive. That's how they show up in relationships. They're not interested in cooperation. They're not interested in reciprocity. They're not interested in mutual respect. They just want to dominate. And that's an abusive person. So if you're not showing up in relationships like that, then again, you are by definition not abusive. This does not mean that any of us are perfect, or that there's not things that we can work on in the relationship or ways that we can improve our own behavior. But there's a very big difference between that, quote unquote, normal things that we have to work on in a relationship, and taking it to the level of abuse, where you're just constantly trying to dominate and control someone. So you guys, let me know, is this helpful? Is this helping you to start to break out of some of that gaslighting fog that you may have experienced? I know that I had a lot of confusion when I came out of my abusive relationship. I literally thought that, yeah, I think that maybe I was abusive, because you may not start out thinking that when you go into a relationship like that, But when you get told that over and over again, you can't help but almost start to believe it, especially if you are self-aware and introspective. So I'm going to read Carol's comment here. Carol is saying, my daughter is an empath, and has suffered the same mental and verbal abuse from her dad. Luckily, she's so sympathetic and compassionate that she wants to help others. Aw, yeah, I can relate to that, Carol. Your daughter sounds amazing. But yeah, it's so hard for us, in particular, when we're empathic people, because we're often very self-aware. And I'm going to tell you specifically now what happens from the spiritual perspective that adds to a lot of this confusion. So what's happening on a deeper level here? What's happening from the spiritual perspective when someone says that you are the abusive one? So if you are self-aware, and most empathic people are, you're introspective. You turn inward. You do a lot of deep thinking and feeling. And when you turn inward, what you will see is the potential within yourself to be abusive. Every single person out there has the potential to be abusive. So you see that within you, and then you can go, oh yeah, you know what? I can see that. I can see that I could be abusive. Maybe I really am abusive, right? Has this happened to you? It's happened to me. But you're not, because a majority of the time, you're not acting that behavior out. You're able to inhibit that behavior because you know that it's not okay, because you know that it's hurtful, because you know it's not the right thing to do in a relationship. You know it's not the healthy thing to do, so you don't do it. You choose not to do it. You're not concerned with power and control, so you're not exhibiting those abusive behaviors. Doesn't mean you haven't thought about it. Like in a moment where someone's hurt you, you think, oh my gosh, I'd like to just hurt them right now. But you don't do it, right? So just because you have that potential within you, that doesn't make you an abusive person. Just because you are aware that you could be abusive does not make you an abuser. So I hope this is helpful. And, gaslighting is so prevalent in these abusive relationships that I actually created a very specific module in my 12-week Living Free, Finding Love program, where it's specifically about deprogramming your mind from all of the abuse you experienced, including the belief that you are the one who is abusive. I call it deprogramming because I've talked about in the past how abusive relationships, they are like being in cults. There's so much manipulation, there's so much brainwashing, there's so much gaslighting that happens that when you come out of those relationships, you literally need a deprogramming to undo all of that to get you back to reality. And one of the biggest parts of that is understanding that just because you might have had some behaviors that were abusive at times or hurtful, that does not make you an abusive person. There's a very big difference here. Remember, if you are primarily concerned with power and control, that is what makes you abusive. Exhibiting one or two of those behaviors at times when you are under extreme stress because of the abuse you experienced, that doesn't make you an abusive person. So yeah, we go really deep into this in my program. And if you're really struggling with trying to figure out what the heck happened to you after a toxic or an abusive relationship, please reach out to me, because I really may be able to help you with my program to start to unravel all of this stuff. And because you can't break out of this gaslighting on your own. It's pretty darn near impossible to do it, because the very nature of gaslighting makes it impossible to break free from without some objective outside support. Because you start to believe everything that your partner tells about you, tells you about who you are. And you need someone objective to help you see through it. Otherwise, you'd be able to do it yourself, right? You'd be able to just leave that relationship, but it doesn't work like that. You need someone outside of you to say, hey, help you clear through all that fog and say, hey, no, what this person is saying, this isn't true. And they can help you shine a light on that and help you see the reality. And let me tell you, that feels amazing after being in an abusive or a toxic relationship. So yeah, if you're interested in working with me, send me a message and we'll chat about it. So yeah, let me see your comments here. Okay, yeah, so Sandra's saying, I thought I was crazy and possibly blacking out. Yeah, I had convinced myself that that was possible. In reality, I was being gaslighted. Yeah, exactly. There's such an extreme amount of distress that happens internally when you're being gaslighted, when you're being made to believe that you are the abusive one. It's actually one of the most dangerous forms of abuse that you can experience, because it just turns you completely upside down and you turn everything inward, and it's a really dangerous psychological place to be. So if you are in that place, I strongly urge you to reach out for professional support as soon as possible. So Carol's saying, thank you for clarifying that. You're welcome, Carol. Maya's saying, yeah, I turn inward and I ask myself, what am I doing here? Am I abusive? Yes, because if I speak, I'm told I'm manipulating. Yeah, I'm confused. Why would I come across like that if I want to talk? Yeah, that's exactly it. You know, people, like I said, who are abusive, they are not interested in hearing your thoughts. They're not interested in hearing how you feel. They're going to constantly deflect that. They're going to say, nope, I don't want to hear it. Nope, you're the one who's manipulating. You are the one who's abusive. And that is abuse. And that's not going to be a healthy relationship. And so Suzanne's saying, the only person I abused was myself by allowing this mistreatment. Exactly, Suzanne. I love how you put that. Yeah. Carol's saying, his parents have suffered from his dad. It trickled down to my soon-to-be ex. Yeah. How is he the only one like this when he has a twin, an older brother and sister? So Carol, do you mean that his siblings are not like that? Like it didn't trickle down to him? I'm going to assume that that's what you mean and address that question. Hold on here. Let me take a sip of water. So when there is an abusive dynamic, within a family, it doesn't always get passed down, quote unquote, to all of the children. Some of the children cope with it by becoming abusive or narcissistic themselves, and others cope with it by becoming more empathic. And that's kind of how that dynamic turns out. Occasionally someone will walk away from that type of dynamic relatively healthy, but that's pretty rare. So people cope with it in different ways, and you might have seen this within your own family, where some of your, like if you experienced abuse as a child, you might have become more empathic, and other people might have become more narcissistic and more abusive as a way to cope. I do think that some of it has to do with genetics and kind of that inherent disposition that you get. But some of it also, I think, has to do with just what you've seen works to adapt to that situation. So if you noticed that it works to become more withdrawn and to become more quiet, that's the primarily coping mechanism that you're going to use. If you've noticed that it helps to be a little bit more narcissistic, not that it's right, but that's what coping mechanism that person is going to choose. And this is largely unconscious, and I don't think that the scientific world is very clear on what is actually going on here, why one person turns out more empathic, one person turns out narcissistic. So it's an area where there does need to be more research and more understanding. So yeah, Marlon is saying, all sounds familiar. Carol's saying, yeah, after 25 plus years, I refuse this treatment. Yes, you are in the right place. So Nikki's saying, I've taken steps to heal by seeing a therapist. Awesome. After ending my marriage, I had a really good therapist, and I know that I'm not crazy and that he definitely has mental health issues and everything, and at least I got out. Yes, Nikki, awesome that you got help. It makes such a difference. One of the first people that I reached out to coming out of that relationship was a women's shelter that was local in the area, and it was the first time that someone had said, oh my gosh, no, this is not you. Like, you're not crazy. You're experiencing abuse. It was like a giant weight had just left me. But at that point, no one was able to tell me that. I had to get that support from people who knew what they were dealing with and knew what abuse and manipulation and gaslighting looked like. So yeah. Carol saying, yes, I see his eyes roll when I want to say something to him. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Cassie's saying, my ex accused me of being manipulative anytime I disagreed with him or put up a boundary. I've heard that narcissistic people know exactly what they're doing. I don't agree with that. I think my ex truly believed his twisted sense of reality. Yeah, Cassie, this is a great point, and I'm glad you brought this up. When people talk about narcissism, they talk about it in very black and white terms. Like, all narcissists do this, or all narcissists don't do that. That's not how it works. There are some narcissistic people who do know what they're doing. They're more rare. They're more of the higher level. Not that there's like good or bad levels, but they're more of a, I guess you could call it like a higher evolved form of narcissism where they are self-aware, but they just don't care. Those are the more dangerous people. They're more, they're leaning more towards psychopathy. But most I can't even say it, most narcissistic people, you're right, they don't actually know what they're doing, so to speak. They're not self-aware. They do believe their own stories in their head. And that's what narcissism is like for most narcissistic people. It's truly a delusional reality that they're living in. In their delusional reality, to them, you truly are abusive. Because you're basically not being a doormat or like an inanimate object that just caters to their every whim. To them, that's abusive. And so they'll tell you, yeah, you're abusive because you're bringing up issues. They don't like that. So yeah, Cassie, you're absolutely right. I think that your ex did absolutely believe his twisted sense of reality. That's how it is for most of them. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, Carol is addressing her question from before. My hair is bugging me. It just looks like really frizzy there. Sorry, you guys. But yeah, so she's saying, but they grew up with terrible punishments like standing on tiles for hours. Oh my gosh. Or walking around with bricks taped to their hands. Holy cow. Yeah, so yeah, Carol, like I said, I think it just can depend on the disposition of the child as to how they cope with such extreme abuse. Yeah, and I do think some of it can definitely be genetic and just how you're kind of wired when you come into this world as to what extreme of coping mechanism that you gear yourself towards. I hope this makes sense. Okay. Yeah, so guys, that was all that I wanted to cover today. Really, in summary here, if you are watching this video, if you're in this group, if you care about having healthy relationships, you're not abusive, because your primary motivators in relationship are not power and they are not control. That's when it's abuse, when your primary goal in a relationship is not to have a reciprocal loving relationship, it's to dominate. It's to have control over someone and get all your needs met all of the time, no matter what, no matter if it hurts someone, no matter what the other person thinks. That's abuse. And I can guarantee that all of you guys here are not abusive. Maybe you exhibited some behaviors that maybe if you could go back in time, you wouldn't do them again, but they happened because you were under some extreme psychological distress because of the abuse you experienced. So I hope this was helpful. I'm going to leave this up for a couple seconds here in case you have any comments or questions here. But yeah, again, if you are going through this, if you are in a relationship right now and you think that it could be abusive, you're not actually sure, reach out to me, because I do sometimes offer consult calls where they're just 60 minutes and you just need some objective feedback and you need some clarity as to what's going on, whether maybe you just want to know, is this abuse or is this not abuse? So reach out to me and we can talk about that. Oh, Suzanne says, thank you. You're so welcome. You're so welcome. This was fun for me to do. This is a really interesting topic. And I love talking about this because it just happens so often where such like kind, empathic people come out of abusive relationships and they think they're abusive. And I'm like, oh no, you're like the farthest thing from abusive. So Nikki's saying, Yeah, my ex believed his delusions. Yeah, absolutely. Anytime I said how something made me feel, he felt I was arguing. Yeah, I've heard that too. He had his entire family believing I was crazy. I divorced him and had to block him everywhere because he wouldn't leave me alone. Wow, okay. I've stayed single to continue my healing for me. He was chasing me and was engaged before we even divorced. Wow, holy cow, Nikki. A very manipulative man. Sounds like it. Yeah, and that's what happens too in these situations. It's not just you coming out of these relationships thinking you're abusive. Your partner or your ex has other people convinced of that too at times. And that adds a whole nother layer to this. When everybody around you starts to think, oh, well, maybe she is abusive, you really can question yourself. So again, make sure you get support in this situation. So Carol says, thank you so much. I've done so much reading on it and listening to audiobooks on this topic. Yeah, that can be really, really helpful too. Get as much information as you can to help you unwind this. I do also recommend not just reading things and not just watching videos or listening to things. You do need some more specific support that is targeted to your exact situation. But yeah, that's a really good place to start. Carol's saying, prayers to all of you that have or are still suffering. Maybe we always will. Oh, Carol, do you mean suffer? I don't think so. I don't think that's how it has to be. There is a period of time where you will have to go through some healing, but it doesn't mean that you have to suffer with this forever. You can heal from it. You know, I'm an example of that, and a lot of the other women that I've worked with have also come a long way and have healed from these relationships. So yeah, there is hope here. All right, guys, I have gone on long enough. If you think of some other topic that you want me to talk about, please put that in the comments. Or you can message me privately and just say, hey, Lindsay, I have an idea for a live training that I'd love for you to talk about. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for participating. And I will see you next week with a new topic. All right, bye.